Thank you very much. Before we get to Dr. Olsky, we have one more thing. It's my honor and privilege to have the mayor of Paradise Valley, a good friend of ours, to just share some short remarks.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, to welcome you all here. Thank you to both Rabbis Levertov for sponsoring this important event. Welcome Dr. Olsky. As the grandson of Holocaust survivors, this is a particularly important event to me. But as we learn more and more that many of our young people aren't familiar with the Holocaust, it's as painful as it is, it's always important to remind ourselves of the suffering of our people, but also the reemergence. So it's wonderful to see you all here, and I'm just as interested in everyone else to hear this remarkable historical account, not a story, but history. And thanks again, and welcome to Paradise Valley.
Thank you very much. Tonight's conversation will be moderated by my better half, Chai Levertov. Together, we direct Chabad of Paradise Valley. Dr. Olsky's story is recorded in the book Born Survivors and is one of faith, triumph, and hope. And it is my honor to introduce Dr. Mark Olsky to join us on stage. They thought you were talking.
Yep.
Hello. Thank you. Yes, thank you so much for joining us. I really feel that it's my greatest honor to be the one up here with you, so thank you for that. Before we begin, I guess it's a really good idea just to have some background. Do you live here? Can you tell us a little bit about your family?
Sure. Did I have notes here or something?
I remember your name. I know.
Okay, so I am almost 75 years old, which is one point of the story of my being here. And at the age of 70, I became a character in the book, which this, and it has spurred more interest, almost surprisingly, in what my background is. I thought I was a pretty ordinary person. I'm a Holocaust survivor, technically, but I almost have to apologize for calling myself that, because as far back as I remember, I was a happy kid. I wasn't conscious of the mortal danger that I was in. I wasn't conscious of what was being done to me and my family at the time that it was done. I was conscious of the fact that I grew up without grandparents, without most of my aunts and uncles. But other than that, my parents saw to it that I had a normal life. People have asked me where do I live. Well, for about half the year, I live about a quarter mile from here, just on the other side of Scottsdale Road. But that's a privilege I've had. Well, it's a privilege I've had for about 7 years, where I spent a few months here, and for about 23 years, we spent at least a couple, 3 weeks each year, all in the same same place. I'm a semi-retired, mostly retired physician. Still do some teaching at the medical school in Madison, Wisconsin. And still, every once in a while, get a middle of the night call for a consultation. I don't do very much in the way of hands-on patient care. I have 4 children scattered around the country, well, actually all east of the Mississippi, a couple of them in Wisconsin, not far from me, and one in Boulder, well, I can't say now, one has moved from New York to Boulder, Colorado, so I do have one west of Mississippi now, and one in New York. As far back as I can remember in my life, I never faced the kinds of, or at least not consciously, the kinds of challenges that my parents did. When I say my parents, I mean my mother and my stepfather, who was truly a father to me, but my father, my mother's husband during the war, was killed before I was born. I grew up among really a lot of broken and battered people. I grew up among most of the people I knew as I was growing up as a child, and vivid memories of the horrors of Holocaust. None of it, I mean, literally none, wanted to talk about it, not for many years. My mother spoke about it more to my children, but then she could talk about it without crying. And they got to know more. Sometimes when I need to know some details of my mother's history, I call our youngest child, Charlie, who used to sit with my mother for hours, and and she could talk to him. She could talk to him without crying and tell him all the stories. I got this story pretty gradually, and as grisly as the facts that I learned, the worst of the details were always left out. About age 5, I was told that I was born on a train, and I thought, oh, that is fantastic. I love trains. You know, I thought that was so much better than being dropped off by a stork like an ordinary child. Having seen in later years pictures of those trains with people, live people, just by the hundreds in each of those cattle cars, it was absolutely unbelievable. This is during April and exposed to rain and snow and cold winds. It was unbelievable that people survived it. So my mother was the oldest of 9 children. She was born on the last day of 1918, December 31.
Where did she live?
She lived in a town called Papianice in Poland. That's where she was born. And that's where she grew up in her early years. It was outside the city of Łódź, or what the Polish people call Łódź. It is the second largest city and the largest, or at least at that time was, the largest industrial city. I think it may still be the industrial city of Poland. Very large, about 1/3 of the people of Łódź were Jews, and nearly all of them in the same business as my family, which was the textile business. So it would have been my fate to grow up in the textile business, which would have been a little problematic for me because I'm colorblind. But
Was your mother there her whole life?
okay, she was there until she got married, and shortly after she got married at 18, and got married to a young man who was of a family that owned a large textile factory. That
They also lived in, I'm gonna pronounce it wrong,
Opinions.
yes, you pronounced it wrong?
But,
Is that where he was from?
So, yeah, he was also born and raised in Papianice, but because their business was in Lodz, and it wasn't that far away, it was a short train ride, but my mother and her husband, Money, moved to Lodz to be near where the business was. He was starting, although his mother was really the queen of the business, he was starting to become the manager. He was one of 3 brothers. Absolutely no one from his side of the family at all survived.
So they lived in Lodz together, and can you tell us anything about their life there?
Well, they're almost immediately really, there were troubles, and the war didn't start for them until September of 1939, so that was almost 2 years, or about 2 years after they were married, but the winds of war were there. There was a lot of upheaval throughout Europe. There was anti-Semitic activity. It wasn't limited to Germany and Austria. It was alive and well in Poland, Russia, Ukraine. So
But they didn't feel it.
they didn't feel it too much because they had a good business. They were relatively assimilated, and but they were getting worried, and they were worried about my mother's family wasn't as well off.
That's her husband's family.
That's
And
no, that
your
my mother's side of the family. They got by. They had their own textile factory, really within in their family home. They had
wow.
some. They actually made. They had a couple, 3 looms, and
Wow.
made fabric in the house. Yes,
With all the 9 children.
with 9 children. Yes.
Wow. Okay.
So, right, my grandmother had 9 children in a period of about 11 years.
Wow. Was that common then?
Yes, it was common. It wasn't as common in a family like my grandparents necessarily, and my grandfather was a bit of an unusual person. He was an intellectual. He did a lot of reading. Occasionally, my mother would get a little frustrated with him because he said all he wanted to do was read and make babies. She just said she absolutely adored him, but said he just wasn't trying. And so she had to be the practical one.
Wow. So she kind of like took care of the
She
house.
took care, she became the assistant mother
Wow.
to the younger ones. She was very much, even in her, in later years, as her siblings, the surviving siblings, there were 5 of them that survived. All of them were quite successful, and they were very substantial people in their own right. But around my mother, she was the matriarch.
Right, wow. So she really had a special life with her family, and then imagine us continue on to the rest of the story of her life, but from
Yes.
after September 1939, can you tell us what
Right,
happened?
well, what they did was, first of all, they moved quite back and forth between Lodz and Warsaw. They had an apartment and they had a satellite factory in Warsaw.
This is her husband's family.
Husband's family, and husband's mother, Lita, wanted to be in Warsaw. She had some health, she had a lot of health problems, and she wanted to be able to get her medical care, and so really at her request, they lived after a couple of years in Lodz. After the war started, they moved to Warsaw, and ultimately they were forced into the ghetto.
Warsaw.
The Warsaw Ghetto. And they had their original apartment actually was within the ghetto, but then they were told by the Germans that they had too big an apartment for 4 people, and that was 4 of them were one of my brothers and their mother and my mother, her husband. So four of them lived there. The Germans, they first of all, they wanted to take over the apartment, so they told them that they had to move deeper into the ghetto. They still had they had friends, and someone with a reasonable sized apartment was able to give them a room for.
So that's where they.
That's where they were.
Your mother hadn't seen her family in quite some time.
And just about for about 2 years,
Wow.
they were living in Warsaw. The Warsaw Ghetto uprising hadn't occurred, but things were getting rougher and rougher. And meanwhile, she was every so often getting word from her family, but really getting worried that they would not manage.
Sorry.
So she moved. They had arranged, and actually they had to be smuggled out of the Warsaw Ghetto, and had to be smuggled in. Now, one thing is that both my mother and her husband, I have to refer to him that way rather because my father was my dad, and the only father I knew. They made arrangements for her to be smuggled, and they weren't quite sure when they were going to be back and forth, but in any event, she went, she was successfully smuggled out. They both, by the way, both were fluent in German.
That probably really helped them.
And that helped them a lot. That is what got them to survive. Ironically, what was my grandfather, my mother's father, Shia, was a big fan of German culture. He felt that Germans really were advanced people, and this is what he taught his children to read in German, to read German literature, and to speak German, because this is the language of philosophers, it was the language of great musicians, of great leaders from the past. So he thought they should learn that language. Of course, it's also German very close to Yiddish, and since that was the language of their home, it wasn't that hard for the children to learn German. But they learned German, they read German books, they studied German history. They read children's books in German.
Wow.
Uh,
So they knew how to interact with the Germans. And-
Right. So they got Aryan papers that were forged that showed them both to be what they called in those days Volksdeutsche, and that they were, and they would come and go with those papers. But things were tighter and tighter. It was more and more difficult to pull it off. And anytime they got stopped and asked them about, asked for their papers, they would get pretty nervous. They knew that one of these days somebody would get suspicious. It would be a problem.
So they were smuggled to her family.
She was smuggled to her family. He was going to follow. The same smuggler was supposed to, then a week or so later, was supposed to bring him. They thought it was too risky for both of them to go at the same time.
Wow.
It ended up that he wasn't able to go. That is, the smuggler was stopped and he got spooked about having been stopped, so he didn't follow through to bring him. He stayed with his mother in Warsaw for a while my mother was with her family, first in the Pabianice ghetto, which was a separate one, and then the Pabianice ghetto was liquidated, and everyone was forced over to the Lodz ghetto where they had less space.
What was the Lodz ghetto like for them?
It was, well, it was a horrible place. They had essentially the 11 of them at this point, living in one large room. There was a small little kitchenette in the corner, and on top of it, and what happened was my grandfather built a partition, really a false wall. Originally it was just so he and my grandmother would have a little privacy. But then they really turned that into a false barrier. They created a thing that looked like a wall. He was very good with his hands. He,
So they would go through something to get behind the wall, they would use it to hide, or?
right, they would, and when they rounded up children, which they did regularly, the younger children, for most of the time, the youngest child was 11, and most of the time,
This is your mother's siblings.
these are my mother's siblings. So they were, until they started demanding children older than 10, they were sort of okay, but these transports just got more and more frequent, more and more children were being demanded. And,
Where did they say they were taking them?
well, they said that they were taking them to the country, to farm, to be in some very nice places, but really it was pretty well known. Pretty early, the rumors were coming back, and the rumors told them what was really happening. Children were being killed.
As I was reading it, I was reading that the Germans actually put Jews in charge at the ghettos.
Yes. There was typically a council of elders and one person who was in charge of was the main contact and was given the responsibility to police to get cooperation from
And the transport, they also had to arrange. The Jews had to arrange
the Jews.
transport.
The Jews were given essentially a quota each time. They told, we want 3,000 people on Wednesday, and we'll have a train to take them to the beautiful farm. And then on Friday, we want another 3,000.
So the Jews were the ones rounding the Jews up.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So the person who was in charge, for instance, of the Warsaw Ghetto, who had that responsibility, committed suicide before he ever agreed or before he ever made any arrangement. The man who was in charge of the Lodz Ghetto was actually, there's a lot of history written about that man. His name was Olsky, and Olsky was very controversial because he cooperated, some people thought, much more than was necessary or much more than was justified with the Germans.
Well, people felt that he could have helped them out a little bit more.
Well, they felt that he was a collaborator. Part of it was that, he really did negotiate things with the Germans that might have gotten better deals than if he had done the same thing that the man in Warsaw had done. And in fact, far more people survived ultimately out of the Lodz Ghetto than out of the Warsaw Ghetto.
Do they say because of this time?
A few people said that. My mother actually, they went from being a fighting force instantly to being a rescue mission.
Wow, so how long did it take for your mother to be able to take you out of there?
Out of Mauthausen?
Yeah.
A couple of months.
Months.
There really wasn't, there were really no means and no place. Nobody knew where do you go, how do you get there, with what money, with what, who's still alive, where are they? So things got organized a little bit. The Red Cross and a couple of other organizations started to help. But it took some time. And in fact, there were people at several of the major concentration camps, such as Bergen-Belsen, such as Mauthausen, became displaced persons camps and still operated that way for a couple of years.
Wow. So where did your mother take you?
So they tried, my mother, one of the sisters had a boyfriend, the boyfriend took my mother back
The
to,
boyfriend survived.
the boyfriend survived and came and found them.
Wow.
And he took my mother on a train to back to Lodz, thinking they would try to see if any family members survived.
Her husband.
And she went to the factory, she went to their apartment, and she was immediately told, if you want to live, you get out of here. This is now it's communist property. You're not getting your house back. You're not getting your factory.
This is
post-war. There were some people there. There were friends who felt badly that this was happening. That was the.
So where did she go after that? In Poland?
Well, so she went back to Mauthausen, and from there, all of them, they were looking for a nearby place that they could settle and to start something, yeah. And so they moved over, they went over to Munich. At this point, Vienna, which is closer than Munich, but Vienna was occupied by Soviets. So they went to Munich, which was occupied by Americans.
Right, and then, but you didn't grow up in Munich, did you?
I actually, we lived, my mother, two of her sisters, my stepfather were all living in, were all in Munich.
Right, wow.
And so for the first 4 years of my life, almost 4 years, we were in Munich, Germany, because there was no place else to go. We couldn't come to America, wouldn't allow us to emigrate. Palestine was still illegal, so and people who went to Palestine were turned away or put in British concentration camps in Cyprus.
Was Munich, were the people in Munich a little bit more?
Actually, the Germans in Munich were reasonably friendly to us.
So those 4 years were
Those 4 years were okay.
medical attention?
So we got good medical attention. Well, first of all, they had horrendous inflation for the Germans. The Americans were very good to the Holocaust survivors. So any job that had to be done, any work that had to be done, they would find survivors and hire them, the army. So all of my family got jobs working for the American Army. And so they were getting paid in dollars, and dollars were,
Went really far.
they went very far. My stepdad had appendicitis. This is one of the stories. He had appendicitis, and so he went into the fancy private hospital in Munich. They did an operation. They kept him there for about a week, which was typical at that time. He had excellent care. He was fully recovered, and it was time to pay the bill. And they apologized profusely because they were going to have to charge him a huge amount of 10,000 marks. He calculated that in his head, and he said that would be $3. He gave them a 5 and said, keep the change.
Wow. So they did get lucky, they were in Munich.
Oh, yes. So they did well in Munich.
And after those 4 years, where did your families go?
They were able to, two of my aunts managed to get work permits and green cards to go to Nashville, Tennessee.
Right? Well,
And they asked, they went to, there was like a work fair, and people were looking, they needed unskilled labor in Nashville, so they sent people to Munich to hire people from the war that would be able-bodied, and they asked, this is like from an American movie you've seen, but they asked, where's Nashville? Is it anywhere near New York? Oh yeah, right by New York. Okay, yeah, we have family. We have family in New York, so that's good. That's right, international. But my stepfather and my mother didn't want that. Israel at this point was official. It was legal. They were going to go to Israel. So I grew up from age 4 to not quite 14. I lived in Israel. I lived through Israel was still in its war of independence. That was still raging while I was there, but it was not raging near where we lived. And most of the big fighting of the War of Independence was near Jerusalem. But we lived closer to Tel Aviv, and so there was terrible, terrible food shortage. We lived in a shed that was on the roof of an apartment building, but in the rest of the roof, we were actually able, my dad put up a hen house. And so we had chickens and eggs, and we had to go out every day into the fields and get pick weeds for the chickens to eat. But we had food.
Wow, so that is really quite the journey. I think you can just tell us a little bit about meeting up with the other two.
Okay, so that was, my mother told me there were other babies born during that train journey, but she thought it was absolutely impossible for me to have survived. It was certainly impossible for any other babies to survive. And also, she, of course, wanted to somehow be able to thank the American soldiers that liberated Mauthausen. But there was never going to be any way to do that. Well, enter the world of the internet and Google, and our youngest child, Charlie, who's now 42, who then was 35, and he was, 32. He had started researching Mauthausen and American Army and so forth. He decided he was going to try and find the soldiers. He didn't know anything about other children, but he wanted to find the Army unit that liberated Mauthausen, and he finally found them. They were part of Patton's Third Army, and they actually were a group that stayed as a cohesive unit, had things like monthly newsletters, annual get-togethers, and interestingly, too, quite a few of them were from around the Chicago area and Wisconsin, which is right around the area where we lived. So he got in touch with them, and then the person that he got in touch with said, funny thing, there are two others just like your story that just recently got in touch with us. Same kind of thing. They were able to search out the soldiers, and they had done it. So for my surprise birthday party for this at age 65 was that, and of course, Charlie called up and said, would it be okay if I spent your 65th birthday with you? Of course. Well, we'll have to do it in Austria, near where you were born. Well, all right. So we went to Austria. On the way to Austria, he said, by the way, a couple of people I wanted to meet, he had already been in touch with them, and so we got there a couple of days before the official commemoration. And that was when I met Anna and Eva, and again, their stories are likewise part of this book. They are alive and well, and
they were also born.
Also born as part of that exact same train journey. One on the very first day, actually before they got on the train, and the other on the day that the train journey ended on the 29th of April.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this incredible journey.
What I would like to let you know, if you, I'll certainly take any questions that you may have. And I'll just tell you my email address, which is simply my name and all in lowercase, markolsky@gmail.com. Any of you that Rabbi Shlomi will be, said he will be sending, anyone who registered it here will be sending them an email with that as well. And if any of you who will write me with any questions, I will get back to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So in preparing for the event, Dr. Olsky insisted that he likes questions. So he actually, I kind of forced him to even allow the interview part of it. But if anybody has any questions, you're more than welcome to ask some questions. And after, if you have a book and you want it to be signed, or if you have a question you want to ask him, you're more than welcome to come over. There are a couple books left for sale if anybody is interested in buying them. I also want to thank anybody who helped sponsor this event. It is thank you. Without you, we couldn't do it. And to the Arizona Jewish Life for being a media sponsor, that was very helpful. If anybody has any questions, you can just raise your hand.
Okay, I'll try and project. I got a microphone?
We recommend exercise.
Okay, so, well, this is weird. You said your mom, anyone who met her, she's one of the strongest people you ever met. What do you think that the greatest lesson that they taught you? Obviously, you're a very accomplished man, and what do you think that the greatest lesson that you learned from them or your mom was that you could give over to other people?
Okay, one thing that my mom and dad just, they had very little in the way of formal educational opportunity. And it was the way in which they valued education, the way in which they looked upon it as the greatest privilege that you could have is to get knowledge, to learn anything you can learn, and do something with it. And they would sacrifice anything. There were times when they needed me badly to work at the store. We had a store that we opened less than a year after we arrived, and my parents didn't speak much English. They needed me to be there to speak English for them. And they would absolutely insist that I had to do my homework, and they would somehow manage. So I did work in the store an hour or two, whenever I could, but the value of education was the main thing. The other thing, I have to say one other thing, and that is, I grew up being pretty angry about the story. And to the point where, as a teenager, I really thought, you know, I could become a terrorist. I could just kill Germans. That would be a good thing to do. And my mother, I knew enough not to quite say it that way, but my mother got a sense of one day that I was, you know, I didn't form a plan, but she said, okay, listen. She said, the Germans took the clothes off our backs, they took everything we owned, they killed more than half of our family. The one thing they never took from us is our souls. If you become angry and vengeful, then they will have taken that one thing.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us.
What's that? Yeah. Nice to see you. I like the picture too. I saw a message, remind me on Facebook that she tells me. So then I looked at it and I was like, we can start this up. Good to see you. How are you? Showed my support.
Sorry about that, bud. Pressure fan.
He was a little bit, she defended him slightly. She said he was a selfish pig. My uncle, her brother, my mother's brother, said he had gladly killed him with their hands. My mother said, well, I wouldn't kill him, but I wouldn't stop you from doing it.
I guess that's slightly defending him.
Right. No, he had his own close friends and his own family, and it was pretty clear that his real goal was to survive as long as he could, and his close friends. But the people that he thought were useful, he had a pretty good idea of who was going to be able to allow and he did create a very productive, and textiles were being made for the Germans, and the
Out
Germans
of the
needed
love
it.
ghetto?
Out of the Lodge Ghetto, a lot of stuff, but mostly things that the army could wear, I think, and so
So they were necessary.
they were necessary. They were, and it was the fact that they made themselves useful to the point that the quotas were not as severe as they might have been. And that was the one sort of silver lining in that horrible situation for him, was that, and that was what he claimed, was, I have no choice, I have to do this, but he demanded that they turn over their children, and he sent them off knowing what was going to happen.
So, I'm sorry, at this point, was your mother's husband with her yet? Have he found a way to get reunited with her?
He did. Well, he didn't get back until it was in early 1943. So he actually just missed being in the middle of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was in April of 1943, and shortly before that is when he left. And he really didn't know. I mean, things were brewing, but he didn't know that that was what was about to happen. So
He smuggled those papers that he
He
had,
got- yeah.
those falsified papers,
right.
to get to Lodge?
So he got back to Lodge, and and then stayed with the family in Lodge beginning in 1943 until the summer of 1944. He was he actually was undocumented. He was so the only way the reason they allowed him to be there, because Rukowski knew who he was, and knew that he wasn't on any of the lists of people. So the only way he allowed him to be there is he had to function as a policeman, really just to keep order, and as a fireman. So they had the same people, mostly the same people, and my uncle did the same. He was a policeman, fireman,
For the ghetto?
for the ghetto.
Wow, so he was staying with your mother's family, and what happened at the end of in the summer of grandfather?
Right, they used the room apparently, well, of course, at least now and then, in the summer of 1944. And they were, the Lodge Ghetto was mostly, I mean, there were a few hundred people left behind, but everybody, including Rumkowski, the boss of the ghetto, on August 28th, the final number of Jews from the Lodge Ghetto were loaded onto the train and taken, they were taken to Auschwitz.
And they were told that they were going somewhere else?
No, at that point, there was no secret anymore. They knew they were going to Auschwitz to be killed.
Wow.
Or to be killed or to be put to slave labor.
Wow, so they got onto the train with the whole family?
Though at this point, the entire family, they managed for the whole family to stick together,
Wow.
all 9 children of the family,
Right.
and both parents.
So at this point, did your mother know that she was expecting you? Getting onto the train to Auschwitz?
She suspected it, or yeah, she was pretty sure.
Wow, so what must have that
She
been
would
like
have been,
getting onto the
she
train?
would have been, about a month and a half pregnant at that point. Yeah, well, it was a scary business. Now, from there, most of the story is in the book. And, because she spoke German, and she had 3 sisters who spoke German, the fact that the family stuck together, they were able to get my one uncle was very resourceful. He was a policeman, but he never caught himself stealing things. So the family got a little bit of extra food, and so here are 4 sisters between the ages of 17 and 25. They were all could speak German just like Germans, and that made them useful because they could communicate. They could help communicate not only with the German managers of the factories, but with and translate for anybody else who didn't speak the language.
So your mother and her sisters came to Auschwitz?
Came to Auschwitz.
Face to face with I'm not going to pronounce it right, but the RAMPE. When Dr. Mengele was there, I'm not sure how to pronounce that in German. What was that? Were they all together? What was that?
They were actually, they huddled together, they stayed,
Wow.
they knew that, well, the children, the 3 youngest children were taken away, parents were taken away, and they knew that was.
The last time.
Actually, her father almost made it through, because he was with my Uncle Bernie, and Bernie was such a strong worker that he actually, his father was in his 60s at this point, which was unheard of for a 60-some-year-old man to survive. But because of the harsh conditions and all that, not only that, but my grandfather had a tendency to trade his bread for cigarettes. That's a strong addiction. But my uncle, he literally was killed 10 days before the war ended, before they were liberated.
He had remained in Auschwitz.
They were, yes, in a, no, I'm sorry. They were actually sent to Bergen-Belsen and were in a work detail in the factory. It wasn't in Bergen-Belsen, it was a sub, because most of these most of the concentration camps had sub-camps. They had a factory several miles from the main camp and this and that. So technically, I think they were in Bergen-Belsen.
But your mother and her sisters, they took them out of Auschwitz.
Right.
Where
After
did
a
they
time, they put them on the train. They were at Auschwitz for a short time. I'm not quite sure how long, it was a number of days. But
And
they
that was
were,
when, and now, sorry, the infamous question of, are you pregnant? And
Right.
what did she answer?
she answered no,
Wow.
because, well, they already knew. They had a pretty good idea that they would not. I mean, not only that, but they had a tendency to do sadistic experimentation on pregnant women and on babies.
Wow, so she risked it if she said yes, she risked it if she lied and said no.
Right. Well, you know, what more could
What
they
more?
do to her than what they were already planning to do?
Wow.
But anyway, yeah, she
So,
said
yeah.
no.
Right, so now
And all the women,
they
yeah,
were taken somewhere.
they were taken, so they decided she could speak German, she was able-bodied, she would go to a factory to work as a laborer. And and the four of them stuck together. They said they can work as a team, they'll be strong that way. So, and then German said, yeah, fine, you know, and sent them off to a city in what became East Germany, or, you know, in the north and east area, which actually is near the city of Dresden. It is called Freiburg. There are two Freiburgs in Germany. One is a Freiburg with a B-E-R-G, one is a Freiburg with a B-U-R-G. The B-E-R-G Freiburg is where they were sent, and that was a subcamp of the Flossenburg concentration camp. But Freiburg is just a city, lovely little city actually, but it has a converted porcelain factory that had been owned by a Jew, and the factory was turned into a manufacturing center for airplane parts.
So the German army.
For the German Air Force. And that's what they were required to do. They would get up, they were forced to get up at 3 o'clock every morning. They had their barracks where they lived, or they had these bunks, three levels, and 3 across, and those were a couple of miles from the factory, the barracks, and so they had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning for the thing that they call the appel, which is roll call. And their roll call, and after roll call, they would, in the winter, they had to walk to the factory. And most of them had wooden clogs, and they would make the streets had cobblestones, and so they would make noise with their wooden clogs on the cobblestones, and the people of the town complained that they didn't want to hear the noise on the cobblestones. Well, I guess.
So that means they walked through a city of people.
Yes, they did.
And the people in their homes were sleeping in beds, and these women were walking to make airplanes.
Yes. That's it. That is exactly what was happening. And
And nobody in the city of Freiburg did anything.
no, well, not that they likely could have done much, but they did not do anything. And some of them, in some cases, maybe they didn't know, or they convinced themselves that they didn't know, or
Who they were.
what this was all about. And of course, these people were being beaten, they were being starved, so it was pretty obvious that they weren't being treated well.
Wow, this is in the fall of 1944?
This is now the fall, in September, October 1944, into the winter and through the spring. Just as an aside, in February, I believe it was February of 1945, when we were still there, that was the famous firebombing of Dresden. A great deal has been written about that, so you may have run into the history of the firebombing of Dresden, maybe from the writings of Kurt Vonnegut. Anyway, they saw that.
Wow.
They about maybe 10, 12 miles away, and the city, in thousands of Allied airplanes, just dropped incendiary bombs onto the city of Dresden, and the flames were so high that they could be seen from the factory. It was still nighttime when they got there for work, so they could see the flames in the night sky early morning.
Did your mother know what was going on over there?
She did. And actually, there was a friendly guard, a guard who liked my mother. And the guard quietly told my mother that, rumors anyway were going around, but the guard told my mother that this is making all the guards, everyone there, very upset that they were being bombed, and that if anyone showed any sign of excitement, happiness, going toward the window to get a better look, they would probably be shot. And so part of my mother's thing was to just run around and make sure that everyone just do your work, keep your head down, look like you don't know what's happening.
Wow, so by now the Germans were realizing that the Allies are coming closer, so what did they do with the woman in Freiburg?
Okay, well, number one,
And let's just put in that your mother is how many months pregnant during this crazy?
well, at this point, for instance, when the Dresden firebombing occurred, she's 7 months pregnant.
Wow.
Or maybe not quite, but almost 7 months.
Walking at 3 in the morning,
Yeah,
7 months. Okay.
with her sisters.
So you were saying that what did the Germans do with that now that they realized that the Allies are?
All right, well, they did, at some point, they were very close to that point. About a month later, or a month and a half later, the German Air Force had run out of fuel. They had no more fuel to fly the planes. They didn't need the parts anymore. And so they decided they had to decide what to do with the women. They did not want the evidence of what they had been doing. They wanted to get rid of the evidence. And so their options were, and again, a little bit of irony, because one thing that saved them somewhat was the Allied forces that were about to come into Dresden and into Freiburg were the Soviet Army. By then, the Germans had already decided they were losing, or most of them knew. They actually still were, a lot of them were still in denial, but most of them knew they were losing the war. And they were scared to death of the Russians. Much more so than Americans and Brits. And so they wanted to, they thought the Russians would be angry with them for the things when they discovered or whatever. Actually, it turned out to be wrong because Russians really didn't care. So they decided to move the women, they decided they had to liquidate, they had to kill the women, get rid of the evidence, and so their last chance was to transport them all to Mauthausen. Mauthausen was the last of the concentration camps that was still operating fully. When operating fully, and gas chambers were still going, the ovens were still going, they could gas everybody.
And
No,
such a big one.
no one would know, and if somebody did find out, it would be Americans. They loaded the women onto the train on April 12th, 1945.
And now your mother is 9 months
My
pregnant.
mother is 9 months pregnant. And the other two mothers, likewise, 9 months pregnant. One mother literally gave birth on the day that the train was being loaded
From Freiburg.
from Freiburg to Mauthausen. Because all of these rail lines, so this is normally Freiburg to Mauthausen, which is not that far from Vienna, Austria. Freiburg to Mauthausen would today be a 3.5-hour train ride. This train was ended up taking 17 days. And had they been able to do it in 16 days, the gas chambers were still working. At 17 days, the gas chambers became inoperative. There was no more of the poison gas. And they decided that they had to, the end of the war was getting close enough that they had to dismantle it.
So they left April 12th from Freiburg,
And
and your birthday is
April 20th, which
on this train.
on the train in the middle of a couple hundred women in one open car.
Wow.
And
Did your mother, she just must have been really strong to make it through that and to have the will to keep, for you, the baby.
yeah, she was anybody that ever knew her at any point in her life knew that she was a very tough person. Just
What she meant.
she could just do anything, really. So yeah, she.
So they had obviously nothing medical, nothing that even I don't know, how.
One miracle was this: of the 200 or so women that were in that car with her. I mean, first of all, there was no room for anyone to really lie down even, but they managed to create a little extra room. And one of those women was a doctor, a woman doctor from Prague.
Wow.
And in fact, her history is known. Edith Mautner, or Edita Mautnerova was her name, and they actually managed to get her to my mother's side.
Wow.
They had a rusty razor, somebody had a rusty razor blade to cut the cord, and so she actually had a doctor in attendance when I was born.
Wow. Oh my. So the risk, obviously, of infection for you and your mother was
Oh, yeah.
almost 100%.
It was, yeah. But
Wow.
with no one would allow that to happen today.
No
So
food, no.
there was some food. There was one other miracle of the train was forced to stop, partly the mechanical problems or whatever. The train was forced to stop for almost 2 days in the Czech town of Horny Gryza. And again, the story is in the book. I got to visit Horny Gryza, by the way, 3 years ago,
Wow.
and it was an amazing story.
Was it a good town story?
Yeah, oh yeah. They literally saved every one of the women that survived only survived because of the people of Horny Gryza.
Wow. The Germans left the people of Horny Gryza.
Well, it was, there's the station master, this is in Czechoslovakia, which was at this point in transition, it was still under control of the Germans. The station master was a man by the name of Anton Pavlicek, and he saw what was happening on the train. The train was stopped at his station. And Germans being Germans, they were all about uniforms and authority. And, so the first thing that he said, we need to do something for these people. And they said no, and he said, I'm the station master, I'm in charge here. And
He also risked his life.
he did. But they said, okay. So they baked something like hundreds and hundreds of loaves of bread. They brought milk, they brought soup, they brought warm blankets.
Wow.
And these people were very, very close to death, and this saved a bunch of them. Still some died right there. Yeah. And so that the fact that so fast forward 70 plus years, we had a chance to actually come as guests of the town of Horny Gryza. And that story of that train has become part of the lore of the town. It is the thing that they consider themselves famous for. It's something that they're extremely proud of what they did. They teach this to their children at their school.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
You definitely deserve that.
The Soviet Army ultimately came and, of course, occupied Czechoslovakia. And when they found out, the Soviets found out what Anton Pavlicek had done, they fired him and he died a pauper.
So this train that you were now on
Yes,
is on its way to Mount
Mauthausen.
And what happened there?
And so, well, once the train arrived at Mauthausen, now it's April 29th. And they decided to just, they just said, put the women, babies, whatever, in the tents, and they'll isolate them, they'll die of disease, they'll starve, whatever.
But they had originally planned to use the gas chamber.
Originally, the plan was that everybody that was coming in on that train was going to be gassed and burned that same day that they arrived.
But that day was the day
That day was the day, that was the first day that the gas chamber was no longer operational.
Oh my gosh.
And so that was, that was a bit of luck.
So how long were they in Mount before they?
So they arrived on the 29th. On May 5th, 6 days later, the Americans arrived.
And where were you for those 6 days? In just
With
the
my
barracks?
mother in the middle of just some barracks.
Wow.
Now, my mother said at this point, some of the Germans started to give them a little food, and she wasn't sure if it was a few people finally having the courage to, or the understanding that they weren't putting themselves so much at risk to follow their conscience and do something. She thought maybe some of them were just afraid that they would be accused of war crimes, and that they thought they would try to have some character witnesses.
Oh, the last 5 days.
Yeah,
Right.
the last couple of weeks or so.
So for these 5 days, the woman in Freiburg, your mother, you were just waiting, not knowing what's happening around.
Exactly.
You're aware
Yeah,
that the
no.
Allies were so close.
No one knew that they were that close, no. Not only that, but the unit that liberated Mauthausen, they were actually under orders not to enter the concentration camps. Because their mission, these were the last days of the war. So the liberation of Mauthausen took place on May 5th, because the sergeant who disobeyed orders actually went in and liberated the concentration camp.
Why was he not supposed to?
He wasn't supposed to, because his job was to move along the Danube River, and once as they moved along the Danube River, the Russian army, the Soviet army, was coming from the other direction, and they were going to meet up, and that would be the official moment that the war in Europe ended. So VE Day was May 8th, 1945. It literally took place within walking distance. I mean, the ceremony, or the ceremonial meetup of Russians and Americans, that was the moment of the end of the war in Europe, the last spot that the Germans surrendered was at Linz, which they wanted that. That was symbolic for a couple of reasons. I mean, number one, it just happened to be where the two armies advanced toward each other, but also symbolically, it was the birthplace of Hitler. It was Linz in Austria.
So this is how close to Mauthausen?
About 2 miles, or
Wow.
maybe 3 or 4 miles.
So once the Americans came into Mauthausen, you and your mother were very far from being actually free, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, everyone was still sick, everyone was still starving. But it was remarkable, but one thing that was really remarkable and very, very different in terms of what happened in the concentration camps that were liberated by Americans versus concentration camps liberated by the Soviets, was that the Americans immediately rolled up their sleeves. They saw how people were suffering, and a lot of them just went to work doing what they could. Now, in some cases, they overdid. They gave too much food. They gave chocolate, and some people died as a result of, or got sick from eating the wrong things or eating too much immediately. But in any event, they brought in medications. They provided, and they really went.